More than half of the world's population watches the World Cup every 4 years. It is more than just a football tournament. It is a story of ambition, rivalry, politics, tragedy, and the legends who changed the game forever. But the World Cup did not start as the biggest sporting event on Earth. It started as one man's impossible dream. Almost 100 years ago, a Frenchman named Jules Rimet believed football needed something bigger, a tournament where countries from every corner of the planet could compete against each other. In 1928, while watching football become more popular than ever, Rimet asked a simple question: why should football share the biggest stage with other Olympic sports? Why not create a championship that belonged only to football? But creating the World Cup was not easy. Many countries did not trust FIFA. Some believed the idea was too risky. Others refused completely. For 2 years, Jules Rimet traveled across Europe, trying to convince football associations to join his crazy idea. Door after door closed. But he never gave up. Slowly, a few nations believed in his vision, and in 1930, the first FIFA World Cup was finally ready. The tournament was awarded to Uruguay, the reigning Olympic champions. But getting teams there was a huge challenge. In those days, traveling across the Atlantic meant spending weeks on a ship. The journey was expensive, difficult, and dangerous. Many European countries looked at the cost and decided not to go. Egypt was supposed to become the first African nation to compete, but their ship was delayed by terrible weather. By the time they arrived, the tournament was already finished. Only 13 countries made it to the first World Cup, but those 13 teams created history. Uruguay built the massive Estadio Centenario and prepared a celebration unlike anything football had ever seen. Thousands of fans filled the stadium, ready to witness the birth of a new sporting tradition. The final was between Uruguay and Argentina. The stadium was packed with more than 90,000 passionate supporters. Argentina took the lead, but Uruguay fought back. When the final whistle blew, Uruguay had won 4-2. They became the first World Cup champions in history. The tournament that many people doubted had succeeded. And suddenly, the world wanted more. 4 years later, the World Cup traveled to Italy. This time, qualification was introduced and more nations competed. But Uruguay was still angry that many European teams had skipped the first tournament. So the defending champions decided to boycott the competition. Egypt became the first African team to play in a World Cup match. But Italy was the team everyone was watching. They dominated the tournament and reached the final. Italy defeated Czechoslovakia in extra time and became Europe's first World Cup champions. But the victory came with controversy. Italian dictator Benito Mussolini used the tournament as a political weapon, turning football into a symbol of his regime. The World Cup had already shown the world something important. Football could unite people, but it could also be used for power and politics. In 1938, France hosted the tournament. South American nations were angry because the promise of rotating the tournament between continents had been broken. Argentina and Uruguay refused to participate. Italy reached another final and defeated Hungary 4-2, becoming back-to-back champions. Brazil's Leonidas became one of the stars of the tournament, scoring 7 goals and showing the world the talent coming from South America. But nobody knew what was coming next. The World Cup was about to disappear. The deadliest conflict in human history was spreading across the planet. Players became soldiers, stadiums became ruins, and an entire generation of footballers lost their chance to compete. For 12 years, the World Cup was gone. But when it finally returned, football was about to create one of its greatest and most painful moments ever. After 12 years away, the World Cup finally returned in 1950. Brazil hosted the tournament, and the world was ready for football's comeback. But the tournament immediately created unforgettable stories. India qualified, but they withdrew after being told they could not play. Barefoot, Italy entered while still recovering from the tragic Torino air disaster that had taken the lives of many national team players, and for the first time, the British nations joined FIFA's biggest competition. Brazil looked unstoppable. Their star Ademir scored 8 goals, and the entire country believed the trophy was already theirs. Newspapers prepared victory headlines before the final. Celebrations were planned. Everyone expected Brazil to become champions. Then came the final against Uruguay. Inside the Maracana Stadium, more than 170,000 fans filled the stands. The biggest crowd in World Cup history. Brazil scored first, and the stadium exploded with joy. But Uruguay refused to give up. They scored twice and silenced the entire stadium. The match became known as the Maracanazo. Some fans cried. Some could not believe what they had witnessed. Brazil's heartbreak became one of the most famous moments in football history. But the World Cup continued. In 1954, Switzerland hosted the tournament, and something changed forever. For the first time, millions of people around the world could watch the World Cup on television. Football was no longer just a stadium event. It had become a global phenomenon. Hungary arrived as the strongest team on Earth. They scored goals for fun and looked impossible to stop. In the final, Hungary quickly took a 2-0 lead against West Germany. But somehow, Germany fought back. They scored 3 goals and completed one of football's greatest surprises. The miracle of Bern gave an entire nation hope after the devastation of war. 4 years later, the world met a teenager who would change football forever. His name was Pelé. He was only 17 years old, but he played like a superstar. Pelé scored in the knockout rounds and scored twice in the final as Brazil defeated Sweden 5-2. Brazil had won their first World Cup, and football had discovered its first global icon. French striker Just Fontaine also made history, scoring 13 goals in one tournament, a record that still stands today. In 1962, Brazil returned as champions, but Pelé suffered an injury early in the tournament. Luckily for Brazil, Garrincha stepped up. With incredible dribbling and unstoppable skill, he helped Brazil win their second straight World Cup. But the tournament also showed football's darker side. The Zhejiang match between Chile and Italy became known as the Battle of Santiago. It was less like a football game and more like a fight. Players clashed, tackles became dangerous, and police had to escort players from the field. 4 years later, football finally came home. England hosted the 1966 World Cup. They reached the final at Wembley Stadium against West Germany. The match went to extra time. Jeff Hurst scored a controversial goal that is still debated today. Did the ball cross the line? Nobody knows for sure, but England won 4-2 and lifted their first and only World Cup trophy. Then came 1970. Mexico hosted the tournament, and Pelé reached another level. Brazil played some of the most beautiful football ever seen. They defeated Italy in the final, and Pelé lifted his third World Cup trophy. No player before or since has achieved that. The World Cup entered a new era. New heroes arrived. New rivalries were created, and football continued to grow into the greatest sporting event on Earth. From Pelé to Maradona, from Zidane to Messi, from 13 teams crossing the ocean in 1930 to 48 nations competing in 2026, the World Cup has survived wars, controversies, tragedies, and unforgettable moments. It has created legends and brought billions of people together. The next chapter is still being written, because somewhere in the world, the next football hero is already preparing for their moment.